OTTs Way Ahead, Implications of Broadcasting Regulation Bill, is moderated by Abhinandan Sekhri, co-founder and CEO of Newslaundry. Joining him is Alok Prasanna, co-founder and lead, Vidhi Karnataka, Vibodh Parthasarathi, an associate professor at Jamia Millia Islamia, who has a multidisciplinary focus on media policy, digital transitions, and policy literacy, and Anna Vetticad, award winning journalist and author of the critically acclaimed bestseller, The Adventures of an Intrepid Film Critic. She specializes in the intersection of cinema with feminist and other socio political concerns. To ensure a fruitful discussion, I kindly request everyone to be seated and to switch off their cell phones.
Yeah. Thank you so much for attending and staying after tea. Since the introductions out of the way, I just want to tell the audience, while we have had two sessions, one which is focusing more on privacy, the other on specific 2 or 3 legal aspects of the bill. It's not that you need not comment on that while we are going to be discussing OTTs, because you need to have some sort of a segmentation of the 3. In case you want to weigh in on any of those issues, feel free to. Because this is to do with OTTs, Anna, since you do cover entertainment, and we had that entire Tandav, in your, and I don't know whether you read the story by Jerry Shin in the Washington Post about how Netflix and other OTTs have started reacting to right now even a non-existent superstructure which can scare them. From your interactions with people in the entertainment space and your viewing of it, how do you think this is going to impact the industry and the politics of the nation in general?
Okay. In the past 9 years, the term undeclared emergency has been used repeatedly. And I think that in the context of the broadcasting bill and the connection with OTT, I think what we've been seeing in the past 9 years is also an incremental emergency. Because my first reaction when this bill, the draft was published, was that I really couldn't understand why there was a need for it. Because if you interact with people in the entertainment space, especially in the Hindi entertainment space, the amount of self-censorship that is happening is mind-boggling. And it is at multiple levels. So if an actor is outspoken, they will not cast that person because it's, let's say the subject of the show is tricky, so let's not cast this actor because that's a double layer of potential controversy that you may come up against. Then there is at the scripting level. And then you may get financiers and all of that. And we saw that this year with the film Bheed. Anubhav Sinha had made the film Bheed, and he ran into trouble with the censor board, and immediately his producer decided that he wants to distance himself from the project, and Anubhav had to actually delete his trailer. He's recut his trailer, removing the voice of Mr. Modi, who was heard in the background giving a speech announcing the lockdown, and then he removed the producer's name. So now it's a film, if you watch the film, it's Anubhav Sinha presents. Bhushan Kumar is not there. So at that level, and then there are films that magically go through, especially certain indies that magically go through all the layers, and then the OTTs decide that this is too dangerous a subject, or there are cases of the OTTs don't have to release the censored version, right? But they're opting to release the censored versions. And if this is a direct to OTT release, even though they do not have to do this, they are voluntarily, some of them, asking the filmmaker to go and get a censor certification. So the extent of, and it has been happening gradually over time. Washington Post, of course, covered how Netflix and Amazon have reacted, particularly after Tandav being a turning point for Hindi entertainment, and Netflix and Amazon. And now it's not just that, look, scripts were always looked at earlier because, you could have libelous content and stuff like that. But now scripts are being looked at And this is multiple filmmakers have told me this. The scripts of their shows and their films are being looked at for, is there anything that would offend the government? Is there anything that would offend the Hindutva universe? And what would offend the Hindutva universe is not necessarily a reference to religion. It could be, did you praise Jawaharlal Nehru in your film? Then maybe your script will not get cleared. Did you praise Indira? Did you show Indira Gandhi in a good light in your film? Then your script may not get cleared. So it is at, I mean, even at these levels, the scripts are being scrutinized. So there are legal teams and teams whose expertise is scripting, who are looking at scripts for before a show can be made, even after the script has been purchased by, either it has been picked up by a producer or an OTT. And in the case of Washington Post had particularly mentioned a show that you would think that the present government would be delighted with, because it's a show on Indira's emergency, right? But because as an intelligent filmmaker, look, you can't make a film or a series on the emergency back then without talking about the nature of the emergency now. And even that referencing was considered too troubling, too risky, and so the show's not get, it's we're not going to get to see it. It could also be, I mean, I've certainly noticed that there is a greater scrutiny if a show or a film is made by a particular filmmaker who has been vocal in the past, even if that person is silent now. So there's been this gradual build up anyway, and it's not like the censor board wasn't troubling earlier. Filmmakers have had problems with the censor board from time immemorial. So it's not like I'm definitely not saying that censorship has been invented now, but it has become harsher and more stringent, and it has become more the threat of extra constitutional retribution, the threat of the possibility of multiple cases being filed against you in 20 states, of violence in your theaters. I mean, these are things that are being openly told to filmmakers in unofficial interactions with people from the government authorities that are in charge. So, but what is but when you look at this bill and you think, so why do they need to do this, right? Why does the government need to bring the OTTs also under this bill? Because in any case there is so much of self-censorship happening, and the thing is, there are still some final frontiers, however critical one may be, of Netflix, Amazon, and all of the other streaming platforms, and even CBFC for that matter. There are still films that are falling through the cracks. It could be because the person who saw your film, the people who saw your film in a particular examining committee, were not as illiberal as those that somebody else got. So a film like Afwa, Sudhir Mishra's Afwa, it got released, and I remember at the premiere, the first question just everyone had was, how the hell did you get this film past the censor board, right? There was a small indie film called Bhagwan Bharose that got released just 2 months back, and it is a Hindi film about the Ram Janmabhoomi movement and the indoctrination of a child. How on earth did that film get released? I honestly don't know how it got through. But even within that film, you can see instances of self-censorship. But this bill will ensure that even the films and shows that gently are allowed to fall through the cracks by individuals who obviously care about these issues and are just finding ways to get them through. You will find a lot of shows on Netflix and Amazon and Hotstar and all that are actually very progressive and saying things you would be surprised that they're saying, but maybe because that's not the show that the present regime decided to target. So that's not the Tandav of this year. They decided to target Tandav. It could have been some other show, but there are plenty of others that have gotten away with saying far more controversial things. But now that option is what the government is trying to do is close that option also as far as possible, because you have the grievance, if I get the terminology right, because you guys are the legal experts, please correct me. If the grievance redressal officer doesn't accept a complaint, or the public is not satisfied with the complaint against that show to the grievance, then there is the SRO, the self-regulatory organization. There's a content evaluation committee you're supposed to have within the OTTs. Now, obviously, there is self-regulation already happening on these OTTs. We know that because of the shows that have gotten dropped, or the shows that have had to be changed because of the fear of right-wing violence. But now the CEC is an additional layer that is being added beyond the creative people who were looking at these scripts too. So yes, there's a huge amount of self-censorship, but now it's going to just get even worse.
So, I mean, just to that point of inventing censorship and how it's changed, I can just give you a first-hand experience. I was a camera assistant on a film called Monsoon Wedding in 1999, and while it's considered an Indian film, it is a US production, and the rule was that any film that is a foreign production has to have its script approved by the ministry. I think it was the Ministry of ME or the INB ministry, or a combination of both INB. And there used to be someone from the INB ministry observing every shot so that we don't show India in a bad light. And back then, all foreign productions had one guy who was designated. He had given me in petty cash, isko jaake lunch kharwao aur raat ko wapas lana. So that guy wasn't really on set anytime. That was the standard procedure. Today, I can't imagine us doing that. But I read the piece that you had written, Alok, and since you are a policy wonk, I have two specific questions for you, and then you can weigh in on any other aspect that you want. One, there was some confusion, not in my mind, but I know some people confuse that they have exempt OTT because the language just changed in the bill that's been passed as opposed to the one that had been proposed earlier. I called up Meghnad and Apar in the morning that have I missed something. They both said no, they just have changed the language, but there is no carve out for OTTs. The way it's
Sorry, in which bill?
The one that's been
telecommunications bill.
Yeah.
Okay, I haven't seen that yet, so which is why.
So is there any meat to one interpretation that OTTs are exempt? And if you haven't read the bill, that's fine. Maybe we can who can weigh in on that. And the second is, since you do look at policy, is there any equivalent bill, law, rule in other countries that one can look at as best practices to compare this with?
Let me start with the second question, right? Laws just don't come in from somewhere. They operate in a certain political, legal, constitutional framework. Just to go back to our Tandav example, it wasn't the union government doing it. It wasn't even the state government doing it. It was some guy in, I think it was MP or UP, I forget, FIR. That case went through 3 levels of judicial examination before someone said, what is this nonsense? So I don't want to minimize anything that the government does, but let's not assume that it's just the current people who have been voted into power who are the problem. We've spoken about Justice Rohinton Nariman in the previous session. When the Jolly LLB case came before him, he said, yeah, go face trial. Just contempt. Where was his passionate defense of free speech? I know because I've spoken to someone in Star who said, we thought here we are before the most liberal judge in the Supreme Court. Finally, this nonsense will stop. But he said, no, go back and face trial. They gave up after that. So when we kind of look at bills and laws, they don't just come out of nowhere. We have to understand that maybe the government is, of course, not the best defender of freedom of speech, but it's one of the many actors who are against it. The threat and I can honestly see, if I was on the, let's say, the OTT's legal panel, my concern honestly would not be how the government reviews this. And I think that's something what Anna also mentioned. It might be which complete unexpected moron, for the lack of a better word, will suddenly wake up, will be able to gently nudge our whatever is left of our criminal justice system in the direction that he or she wants to. And next thing you know, your executors are... I would actually not be concerned about the content. I would be like, why are you in this country still? Because honestly, that is the point of any day, right? You would pick a fight with the with the censor board under the Cinematograph Act, the CBFC, and we know a lot of filmmakers have done that. What they cannot pick a fight with is the entire criminal justice system, which decides we have to catch hold of someone, anyone, for anything. I mean, the person who got caught in Amazon had literally nothing to do with the film.
Yes.
So when you realize you're in a country where there is basically little semblance of rule of law or anything like an institution which has some adherence or some interest in the rule of law, the actual law that you pass is irrelevant.
Just like 66A, even after being struck
Yeah.
down, people still
Yeah,
continue to
correct.
be
Because,
arrested.
and you know why? The books kept printing 66A. The bare legislation of the Information Technology Act kept printing 66A. The cop who sees it goes, still on the books, so I can apply it. Because for them, no one is going to read a Supreme Court judgment and explain to them to say, no, no, this is not constitutional. They say, I have a copy of the I'm sorry, my grasp of Hindi is not well enough. I'm trying to say it, but he'll say, I see 66A here. Who are you to tell me? Get inside. So I sort of like want us to understand that we have these expectations of bills and laws, and we expect them to descend from somewhere without seeing the political, legal, oh, forget the political, the legal and constitutional framework, which is really the source of the problem. That any day you want to challenge it before, if you want to challenge a order of the CBFC, I'm sure any day Amazon and Netflix and all others will throw all the money at the lawyers and say, please fight, this will be great publicity for our film. What they cannot do is suddenly find themselves individually in jail in UP. That is what they cannot, that is the fear that is sparking this. So, which is where I think we kind of need to sort of not see a law or a slightly better law as a solution. We have to understand this is the underlying problem. And I've totally forgotten your first question.
That is OTT, as you understand it. Are they included?
Yeah. So I can speak from the context of the broadcasting bill, which is what I have looked at more closely. The bill is itself confused about this because on the one hand, it expressly says that this kind of these set of legislations will not apply to OTT, the regulatory framework. But suddenly in clause 20, it decides actually anybody who has anything resembling news of any sort will be governed by this. So it's a completely confused approach in the broadcasting bill also. But I can't speak of the telecommunications bill because I was looking up while the discussion was going on. I don't think a latest version of the bill has been made publicly available. I know some people have got copies of it, but I'm not so sure. I was looking up on PRS and elsewhere.
Yeah, Meghnath.
Okay.
Okay, cool. Right. Yeah, Vibodh. We were discussing, I know two things that you pointed out are audience measurement and its impact, and ownership, and whether this bill has anything to do with that, and how important or not important that is in the larger scheme of regulatory framework. But I just like to say one thing for the audience. Often when we talk, it's very context specific when we say, should there be self-regulation? Media is not under self-regulation. We are also regulated. There is government regulation. The conversation is, should there be additional regulation? So the assumption, starting point, I think it's important how we word or how we frame these discussions, because often to an audience who is not deeply invested in this, they say, oh, media should get self-regulation. That means they're not regulated right now. The same law that apply to the rest of the world apply to us as well. I myself am in court in 5 different cases, 3 against income tax authorities, 1 against Times of India, and 1 against India Today, the protectors of freedom of speech. So there is regulation. Laws apply to all of us. It is just the additional regulation which it's about. So it's not either completely self-regulated or government regulated. There is government regulation. In addition to that, do we need additional regulation is the question. Yeah.
Yeah, so just to add to that, I think the issue there as well is also what exactly are the objects of regulation. I think that's where the details start coming in. What aspects of the value chain, what kind of balance of power, what relationships between the players, what relationship between the state and individual players are being regulated. And I think that's where a fair amount of broadcast regulation has been unclear. Yeah. Defining the object of regulation. Yeah. Let's take up the case of audience measurement. Okay, and that's an interesting sort of part of the broadcast bill. bill, the bill seeks to stipulate a methodology for audience measurement, A, audit such measures, B, and also regulate the sale of the ratings data. Three different specific objects of regulation. Yeah. Now, on the first one, I don't know who's going to stipulate a methodology. I see a lack of state capacity in stipulating a methodology for audience measurement. Yeah, that's one. The issue of audit is extremely important. Those of us who've been in the broadcast business over a period of time has known that that's been one big kind of recurrent scam in the broadcast business, which has led to the collapse of many broadcasters, tremendous amount of opacity, and so on and so forth. That business has been rigged, both by those who measure and those who are being measured there. And thirdly, of course, the sale of data. Okay, I mean, who is this data being sold to? What are the terms at which the data is being sold, and so on and so forth. Yeah. There are two issues here, in a sense, which need to be threshed out here. One, of course, is when we're talking about audience measurement, there has to be very clear guardrails on the privacy of audience. Okay, as technology gets more and more deeper, we have a closer idea of what the audiences do. And is of course much more so when we talk about online audiences. Yeah. So the whole emphasis on regulating, I would use the word, the privacy of the audiences, especially when these data are collected and traded, is something which is missing in the bill. The second thing, of course, is that just bringing about transparency is not necessarily important here, or perhaps even relevant here. It won't solve the issue of the opacity between different types of players in the value chain. Yeah. Neither in broadcasting nor in the much more complex value chain of OTT. So, for example, I mean, there's a lack of transparency between big tech companies and news publishers in terms of the kind of audience data that they are provided there, in terms of the kind of metrics that platforms use to measure what kind of news is popular. Okay, there is also, of course, opacity in terms of what share of that ad revenue ought to be going to the publishers. Yeah. Okay, and this, of course, directly affects the viability of small news publishers. Digipub, of course, being the case example here. So I think every member of Digipub, in a sense, ought to be concerned with this particular aspect here. And this, in a sense, sort of makes me wonder whether, this sort of, the bill is in that sense silent on introducing some, or at least outlining some sort of provisions which sort of regulate the relationship between platforms and publishers at a time when this has been a big debate across the world. There are multiple models available in very different countries, all of which could not be transported to India. But I think the bill misses an opportunity on that. If they put that in the Digital India Act, which seems to be one way in which it will take forward, then again it will do injustice to the broadcasting bill, which claims to be a integrated regulatory framework.
As far as the revenue sharing or the between platforms and digital organizations such as the ones that are members of Digipub is concerned, the two examples are Canada and Australia. Am I right? Or are there more as well?
France as well.
France as well.
Malaysia and Indonesia have got advanced drafts.
And how similar is the formula of sharing among all four? Or are they very dissimilar?
There are different types of democracies. They have different media landscapes. Two of them are large countries, but effectively monolingual. The other two are medium-sized countries, but multilingual. Yeah. And therefore, they have, like India, they have regional media markets. Yeah. They have regional players here. So I think what's important perhaps is to look at the principles that they've been using to try and think about this. For example, in Australia, essentially it's been called the Murdoch legislation because the idea there was to protect the big players. Yeah. In Canada, the whole emphasis was in terms of protecting local news outlets because localism there is very central to media policy. Okay, in Malaysia and Indonesia is largely in terms of geopolitics, in terms of the tech platforms are foreign and the publishers are domestic. So therefore, This is much part of the larger sort of international flow.
And on ownership, I mean, you did mention to me when we speaking outside.
Yeah.
Even earlier, there's never been any regulatory framework that defines ownership. I know that in the pre-internet age, in the US, it was 2 out of 3 because you could either have a ownership of print and television, but not radio, or radio and print, but not television. I mean, no one could own all 3, and it was also state specific
In a particular region.
in a particular region. And in UK, it was 20-20. That means if you have 20% of the market, no one person can own 20% of that network. India never had any such, one person could own everything. If there has never been a precedence of them caring about ownership, should we expect them to care today, especially when you have a significant telecom player, Mukesh Bhai, who kind of owns everything from beginning to end? So why would they even introduce this element now when they've never cared in the past?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, but just to keep in mind, the 2007 bill did talk about aspects of curtailing ownership. Yeah, okay.
And that was before Adani had bought NDTV.
Yeah, much before that. And that's the bill in a sense for me. I mean, there was another panel a couple of weeks ago on this, and I think that seemed to have a bit of a missed opportunity. At that point of time, I think the broadcast media was sort of riding the neoliberal wave and didn't want any kind of intervention.
Inhibition, correct. Yeah, there was a lot of...
and that opportunity, in a sense, or rather those sins committed at that point of time, the price is being sort of...
A lot of money was
sort
sloshing
of down the line, yeah. Yet, I think those the stipulations that do exist for vertical ownership in particular, they are there in the DTH guidelines here and there, and they're scattered. They are completely mothballed. 3 reasons: they allow media groups to sidestep these caps through indirect holdings, through front companies, proxy owners, and so on and so forth. So I think there perhaps that regulation of just putting a cap will not really help if there are no corresponding amendments in the Companies Act. Yeah.
And also, other than caps, I mean, the stated, management credo or motto of Reliance is backward and forward integration. We start from polyester and go all the way back to refineries. So, for them to have a walled garden media and all the way to the telecom network is part of their stated business objective. So,
and if we assume that news is the same as fiber, rayon, and soaps, then I can buy that argument.
Right.
But if there are people who argue that news has a different kind of status, and I would imagine those people are the majority in this room right now, okay, then perhaps that economics, or at least that aspects of sort of normative law cannot be transported.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more.
So some form of media exceptionalism, that's what the sort of French tend to use. Media exceptionalism has to be brought into both the economics and the law as far as news is concerned. And I'm talking specifically about news. I'm not talking about non-news entertainment
OTTs.
content.
Okay.
I'm talking about the fourth estate.
Right. But in all fairness, it's a thin line today. So, what is news, what is entertainment, what are reality shows? Because the format, and I don't say this, in a sarcastic way, genuinely, the line of what is a reality show and what is a primetime news broadcast have blurred, because the same character who becomes famous because of a primetime news broadcast ends up on a reality show and vice versa. So, we'll do one...
Sorry, that leads to the incentives of producing news
Right.
in a particular environment. And as far as those incentives don't perhaps get dampened in some way or the other, either through sort of formal regulation or through very strong determination by the industry bodies, those incentives have to be dampened. In the absence of which, there's going to be a sort of hard coming down by the state.
So we'll do one more quick round, and then we'll take questions or comments, if any. Anna, in the context of entertainment already being so compromised, like it is now, basis what you said, since you do write about cinema, entertainment, and popular culture, just to put in context of, I mean, and I'm not saying what about Indira Gandhi or what about XYZ, do you think showbiz or people who are in film have always tended to be the most easy to kind of uh, comply and get with the program, irrespective of, I mean, are they the easiest targets for any government, right from Sanjay Gandhi onwards to now? And do you see a reason why that is, if at all you agree with that, or do you think there is any sort of opposition by and large in showbiz? The stakes are too high for anyone to really give a shit.
No, actually, there is, I feel that there is a difference between the way the Hindi film industry has reacted to the developments of the past few years versus India's other film industries. There has been much more pushback from India's other film industries. Now, if you look at one of the shows that Netflix has decided to shelve, it's Dibakar Banerjee's show, which is three generations of a Muslim family and beginning, if I remember correctly, in Kashmir. Okay. Um, Now, the fact that that show has gotten made in the Hindi landscape is a little unusual because representation in any case of minorities and marginalized communities in Hindi entertainment is very limited. Whereas you will see a lot more if you watch Tamil cinema or Malayalam cinema, a lot more of religious minorities. If you watch Marathi and Tamil, you will see a lot more of caste representation. But if a show is going to be dropped based on this theme, right? I mean, how do you represent marginalized and minority communities in entertainment unless you take up politically contentious issues? You cannot make a show about Kashmir without being political. So, representation is going to suffer greatly. The I think that the Hindi film industry in particular tends to describe itself as being soft targets and more vulnerable to just justify the way they fold at the drop of the hat. At least in the past decade, we've seen that. I think there has been a lot more courage in terms of the content that is produced by the others, but also this, again, the mainstream filmmakers, the big commercial guys, have folded much more easily than the indie guys. Now, because I was talking about the final frontiers that are fighting back, I think that what this broadcast bill is trying to do also is to get rid of those final frontiers because you see, earlier, if nothing else, there were thematically contentious issues being taken up by indie films now, and those indie films, if nothing else, would get shown on an OTT, wouldn't get released in a theater. They would be shown at festivals. Now, film festivals are not covered by this this bill, but the tightening of the screws by the government on film festivals has increased anyway. So at every level, there is which means now I know, for instance, that there is a festival. I can't name it because I've just been told this confidentially. There is a festival that so you have to send your list of films to the MIB with a little synopsis and stuff like that. And the MIB for this festival stopped three documentaries. One was on Rohit Vemula, one was on Kashmir, and one was on the JNU protests. The festival went to court. They got an okay for two of the documentaries to be shown, but by then the fest was over. Okay, so there is pushback. Those who don't want to push back actually justify their cowardice. I'm really sorry if I sound judgmental, but I do think it is cowardice. When small little filmmakers are fighting back, the richest of them all say, but I'm so vulnerable, there could be 20 cases against me, this, that, and the other. And really, what they don't realize is that it doesn't, unless you are completely 100% pro the government, you will, if they decide to make an example out of you, they will do
there's
that.
no hedging. That's just the nature.
They will do that because with Tandav, actually, that little scene which they made a big issue out of was a scene that was hugely complimentary to Lord Shiva. It was a scene that was portraying him as an activist type of person who cares about farmers and the poor. But they went after that scene. Why? Because the larger serial was showing a certain kind of government that this present government's followers saw themselves reflected
It
in.
was showing student rebellion, and rebellion is just not a
And
good
also,
thing.
and no, also it was showing a certain kind of government that the supporters of the present government saw themselves mirrored in, reflected in, but it didn't pinpoint anything, because great art can do that. There was no lotus, there was no saffron, there was no name of any leader, there was not even a reference to a political leader. So they pinpointed this, or as Alok said, the person who got into trouble had nothing to do with that show.
Yeah.
There was this film called The Great Indian Kitchen, and then I'll let you take the mic. So there was this Malayalam film called The Great Indian Kitchen that became a viral hit a few years ago. And this film was actually rejected by Amazon and Netflix. And not only Amazon and Netflix, who we keep talking about, but all the Kerala TV channels rejected it. Amazon, Netflix didn't give a reason. The Kerala TV channels told them off the record that because the film is talking about patriarchy within a Hindu home and the Shabrimala temple entry controversy, we cannot risk this thing. So now, he didn't. There was no need for a CBFC over there, right? They just decided to reject it. But here's the thing: there was this brand new streaming platform that was Malayalam only that picked up that film, and because of the nature of social media, that film just went viral during the pandemic, and a few months later, Amazon picked it up also. But now, whether it is that brand new platform that says, look, I'm going to risk it because I'm doing only Malayalam and I'm safer in a communist state or whatever, versus an Amazon and Netflix who see themselves as more vulnerable, all three of them are equally accountable, and all three of them are being scrutinized equally if the CEC comes into force, because the content is being looked at by people who, from my understanding of the language of the bill, it's so vague that at the end of the day, I think all the CEC members are going to be government approved people. And if they are not, because you're supposed to give the names of the people you have on your CEC, then anybody who is halfway liberal will be too afraid.
No, also vagueness always works in favor of those who have the institutions, organizations that are actually the ones that do investigations and act. So I'll open it out for questions, and I will keep the questions to Vibodh and Alok, since they have something to add, so we can just take both things together. So if you have any questions, you can ask now, because then I'm just going to give it to Alok. Yes, Paranjay, please go ahead.
I have a question for Vibodh, another for Anna.
Mhm.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Vibodh, you pointed out how the whole television rating point system is completely broken, it's corrupt, it's inadequate. Would you argue that today there's a vested interest on the part of these so-called rating agencies, BARC, Broadcast Audience Research Council, and those who are rated, to keep the system as corrupt, as inefficient, as inadequate as it is at present? And the same question is true for cross-media ownership. You had this whole administrative staff college preparing a report, which was an interim report. It was kept hidden, and then a parliamentary committee asked for it, and then it became public. So where there's a nexus between business, big business and big media, and they're the same today. He talked about Mukesh Bhai and Gautam Bhai and their media empires. So once again, is there not a vested interest to completely bypass and avoid any form of cross-media restrictions on ownership, because everybody gains as a result of that, and which is why you'll continue the way you're doing, and whether it's 2 out of 3 or whether you bypass the law using entities and not conglomerates, you'll continue in the same way. This is really the question I have.
Yeah,
And
we'll take that one first, then I'll come back to the one with Anna. We'll keep the mic with you. Yeah, go.
Yeah. So yes, there's been, so on the ratings part, there's been a vested interest, no doubt about that, both by those who measure and those who are being measured, and also those who advertise on what's being measured there. There is, in a sense, also an equally vested interest in the measurement of the online environment, and that we really don't talk very much about here. So effectively, There are only the large players who are the so-called amplifiers, the intermediaries, uh, who are also then providing the measurements in terms of how popular one particular news outlet is. And they also specify what metrics are used to judge that popularity. It's hidden. It's kind of hardwired into the system, and I think for me that's a much larger concern. Also, because a large number of so-called traditional broadcasters are also moving online. Yeah, the stakes there are much higher as far as online is concerned. Uh, Thinking of a way around, for example, in the US, the Media Research Ratings Council, yeah, what they do is that they have specified for different media who would be the what we would call an empaneled person who will measure the entity, yeah, and what metrics are the ones to be used, and then how are they going to be audited. Okay, otherwise I will come and say that uh, Newslaundry is the highest viewed online platform. Yeah, somebody else will come and say Quint is the highest used online platform. Yeah, so this whole battle of the black battle actually in the digital economy is a battle of measurement. Yeah. Measurement both in terms of subscribers, viewers, and so on and so forth, which of course then also translates into measurement of investments and speculation and so on. So that I think we need to perhaps start talking more about. We are aware of the failures, and I think many journalists have brought that out very clearly in the past. The question is, in this case, in the online case, those who are measuring are not necessarily within the national jurisdiction. Yeah. And I think there again we come into an issue of a geopolitical issue in terms of that. Yeah. In terms of ownership, sort of just to keep it short, cross media in a sense was never on the cards to be regulated. In 2007 only they spoke about vertical regulation, and I think what has complicated that quite clearly is the coming of telecoms, to the extent that in one of the responses to the TRAI broadcast policy, one of the largest cross-owned news conglomerates made a strong case against vertical ownership.
You're talking about the Times of India Group, Bennett Coleman Company Limited.
And therefore, in a sense, that there are tensions brewing within this system between traditional news power, okay, emerging sort of news conglomerates, and those who are purely coming from a tech background, whether they are telecom players or whether they are amplifiers on the internet. Yeah.
Yeah, your question to Anna, and let's keep it short because I was going to go to Alok before we wind
Okay.
up.
Anna, excellent presentation, and I think you made wonderful points. There's censorship, there's self-censorship, there's overt and covert censorship. But sometimes does it backfire? Let me give you an example. Shah Rukh Khan, Muslim, rich, popular, married a Hindu, son is behind bars for almost a month, nothing happens to him. Then Pathan comes out. And then whole lot of people, including the former Home Minister of Madhya Pradesh, says Deepika has insulted the saffron color. Besharam Rang. And before you know it, the producer, Yashraj Films, is laughing all the way to the bank and back. And then comes Jawan, farmer suicides, shortage of oxygen, ballot boxes. So is the arrogance of power leading those who are, controlling what you watch and what you see, leading to them making utterly ridiculous and stupid errors?
I mean, I think that Jawan, Pathan, these are just. You cannot explain how or why, when a controversy or objections from the government will make your film successful versus when it doesn't. I think that there was the mistake that they made in terms of public relations was putting Shah Rukh's son in jail, because I think there was a sympathy wave for Shah Rukh. If you even look at how the public observed his birthday that year, I mean, it's very simple. Out of the blue, millions and millions of people writing on social media about their personal experience of Shah Rukh, when I first saw him, when I first met him, when I first saw a film of his. So there was an outpouring of sympathy. And think from just anecdotal evidence, there were a lot of people who went to see Pathan because they wanted to make a point to the government. Then, as it happens, people had fun also. And then there is this whole FOMO, fear of missing out, that is in operation in the social media era. So when everyone's talking about it, you also want to go and see it, and therefore, it has a ripple effect. Will it, or will it not always happen? I don't know. But the point is, just because neither of these two films, this and Pathan, neither of these was actually taking up an issue where you could pinpoint the ruling party. In fact, Jawan was praised by members of the government, because that hospital thing, you cannot actually pinpoint it to Gorakhpur, because there are so many safety nets. This film Jawan is about how a form of self-censorship is happening, because you want to talk about Gorakhpur, but you know that you can be, your film may not get cleared, or there may be violence or whatever. So if you watch immediately after, there is a map where they show hospitals across the country where the same issue, that the same issue is there, all right. And the name of the girl, people assumed that she's a Muslim, but that name is also a name in Tamil, and it's not a Muslim Tamil name. So they left many things vague, so that if as a liberal you want to see it as a progressive film, you can. But if as a supporter of this government, you want to see it as a film where Shah Rukh is falling in line with with the government and trying to please them, you can see it that way also. So, I mean, these things, you just
So
never know when.
you got to hedge being subversive. There's hedge. And yeah, so
And also within, please let's note that 3 days after the film was started, like it exploded at the box office and did brilliantly, Shah Rukh posted a tweet
yeah,
praising Mr. M.
Mr. Modi.
So, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
you cannot be.
occasionally it can backfire, but you just never know. And what if there is violence? There's outright violence. This time the government allowed it to happen. But what if there was violence? Then you and I, as it is an audience that is just getting used to getting back to theaters, might just decide I'm not going because I want to protect myself, I'll watch it on OTT. So these, I think, were two instances where the government just allowed it to happen. That doesn't mean it'll happen again.
So if I have to be a little cheeky,
Yeah.
Om Rawat must be wondering where did I go wrong.
Who were?
The guy who made that movie on the Ramayana.
Oh, right. Yes,
Adipur, sorry,
Adipurush.
Adipurush. He must be wondering where did I go wrong. I've been sending out tweets for Mr. Modi every day, day on day. I chose a topic which I could not have thought would be safer for the government, but yet he has, poor fellow, has to still face cases across the country. And likewise, unfortunately, OMG2 also, which apparently I haven't seen it yet, actually kind of deals with an issue kind of in a sensitive and interesting way. It's just that the backlash was from people who they thought they were making the film for, and it again, I don't know, I sometimes feel we tend to attribute too much agency and too much power and too much intelligence and too much forethought to this vast body of thing that we call the government. They're incompetent. I deal with them. I mean, yes, sometimes we face the consequences of their incompetence and it's never nice, but sometimes they're just plain incompetent. And maybe the space for action is making use of the incompetence. But I think to assume a level of hyper competence, hyper awareness, they're not God, nowhere, right? And I think we need to sort of understand that, yeah, there is spaces for these kinds of areas where they might I don't know if I don't think they understood. It's just that afterwards, maybe they decided, okay, let's make the best of a bad situation and say we actually Jawan is in our favor. I don't know. But I don't know if we should assume that level of hyperconfidence. They're not even competent at winning elections. So, which is where let's not attribute too much to them also.
Right. So on that note, I'd like to thank the panel. We have to move out of here. But what I would like to specifically say is that while these 3 sessions took place here, and I learnt a lot, and I was informed of a lot, and I did change my positions on many things. I was hoping that the Parliament would see discussion, 3 times as informed and as enlightening as this. But unfortunately, I know for a fact it was not even a quarter as enlightening and informative as this. We would like to see much more articulate, educated, and competent people discussing bills like this in Parliament, and not just at forums such as this. But I do hope we will one day. Until then, we'll do what we can. This will be put online. Do share it. Maybe 1 or 2 lawmakers will see it and say, maybe we should make that point. And sorry, and if I'm not suspended, but I would definitely.
If they are not
Yeah, of course they would. I mean, the ones who, or they can just talk about it outside in the Parliament lawns. But I would want to thank all of you for coming. Alliance Française, I'm sure I've got that pronunciation wrong. But I'd like to thank them for their partnership and hosting us here. Just so you know that we even screen films around the city, and there are only 2 theaters in Delhi that will screen a film without you getting police permission. I don't know if you know that. It's shocking. But I'd like to thank the Digipub executive, our young Betwa here, who has, in a very short time with much responsibilities on her shoulder, it's okay, not so young, but pull this off. And Gul, our Digipub, I guess, master in charge of this event, and our 2 wonderful interns, Ishita and Ashi, for putting all this together. Kailash ji for his crew for filming this, and Shelly, thank you for your support. Thank you all for being part of it, and thank you, panel.